Hello, everyone, and welcome to our reading today. It is A Fish Out of Water. I'm going to give it a few seconds to let everyone hop in before we get started. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, let's see. How are we? I think that'll do. Okay. So again, welcome. My name is Santiago. I will be your moderator today, and we have a lovely conglomeration of panelists who will be reading from their books today. Our theme is A Fish Out of Water, so characters finding themselves in unexpected situations. If you have a question while authors are reading, please go ahead and pop those into the Q&A session, and then the chat is there for you to say hi to us and also to each other as participants. And the last thing is Sandy will put information about a sale going on. We will have select titles from the participants in the book-a-thon this weekend available for sale, and Sandy will drop the links for us into the chat. So welcome, and thank you all for joining me, Brad, Dena, and CJ. I am very excited to be here with all of you, and I look forward to hearing your latest reads. We are going to start with CJ today.
All right. Okay.
So while you're listening and viewing our session, participants, please set your cameras to gallery view or your views to gallery view, so that way you can see everyone when we're all together. Otherwise, we will have just the reader with their camera on and the mic. So thank you. CJ, if you would just give us an introduction and a quick summary about what you'll be reading for us today, and we'll get the ball rolling.
Sure. So I'm reading from my latest Between Takes. It is actually, it's a story about the Toronto film and TV industry. Evie Harper is a actress in the hottest new show, and Simone is the new hire. She's the intimacy coordinator who's just come on to start season 2. So a lot of this is her fish out of water story, because she's also not a Toronto native. She's from Montreal, and Montreal and Toronto are very different cultures. And the scene I'm reading is Evie and her roommate / best friend Shane are shopping in a little grocery store, and they bump into Simone, and Shane kind of puts Evie in an awkward situation. Oh, wow, did you see this? They have amateur powder. Shane's excited voice filters through the cramped shelves of the tiny bodega. It was one of their rare Sundays off together, which meant they usually liked to explore the city. Today, they were in a store off Bloor Street, not too far from their apartment, looking for ingredients for a catering gig Shane had agreed to take on. Evie weaved her way through to the back and glanced over Shane's shoulder. It looks like every other spice you have in the kitchen. He pulled the small bag back in mock horror. I'll have you know, this is treasure. It's not anything I can use for the wedding, but I'm buying it nonetheless and making a mental note that this place is gold. He flipped it into his basket and turned back to the wall of spices. So, tell me about this new intimacy coach. Coordinator, not coach. Oh my God, whatever. What's the difference? Coach makes it sound like I have intimacy problems, and she's helping me work on them. She's like a stunt coordinator, but for intimate scenes. That's how she described it anyway. Doesn't matter what her job title is. Let's talk about the fact that you've mentioned her in pretty much every sentence that's come out of your mouth since you got back from buttfuck nowhere. Has she seen you naked? What? Evie smacked his arm with the back of her hand. No, that's an inappropriate question. Shane placed his basket on the grungy floor and turned. Grasping her face with both hands, he tilted it up and said, you once asked me if I exfoliate my dick, thus proving our friendship has no inappropriate questions. So, you like her. I mean, I don't not like her. Oh, what the fuck does that mean? It means she's not something I'm going to pursue. End of story. Shane added a few more boxes of spice from the shelf to his basket and continued through the store, Evie following. You know what the end of this story is, right? You end up alone. What happens when I find my Princess Charming and go off into the sunset to make lots of babies, and you're still alone? I am not adding a mother-in-law suite to my basement so you can move in and become a nanny to my many, many children. Evie stared up at him in amazement. You've thought way too much about this. Also, you're overestimating the number of kids you're going to have. You're looking for women in Toronto, and most of them don't want any children. Where is this magical princess who's willing to reenact a 50s musical with you? That is the beauty of my search. I'll know she's the right one when she's willing to produce a litter for me. He flicked her nose playfully. Stop changing the subject. This is not about me, it's about Evie. They both turned. Simone stood at the end of the aisle, her basket full of fruits and vegetables. Paired with her dress today were knee-length boots and a Burberry jacket tied and cinched around her waist. She reminded Evie of that last scene in Breakfast at Tiffany's when Holly goes looking for the cat down the alley. Simone, hi. Shane practically pushed Evie out of the way. So you're the new intimacy coordinator on the show. He took her hand and kissed the top of it. It's so nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you. Evie elbowed him in the ribs. I'm Shane, by the way, Evie's roommate. Simone smiled, seeming charmed. I've heard about you. A chef? Shane turned to Evie and spoke as if Simone couldn't hear them. She has an accent. You know what that means? She gets extra points. Shut up. He peered into her basket. What are you making? As if Simone hadn't heard any of that, she said, my brother is coming for a visit and he's feeling a little down, so I'm making him his favorite, beef stew. Sounds delicious. Are we invited? Evie turned to Shane as if she'd never met the man before. Oh my God, you don't just invite yourself over to someone's house. Who raised you? To Simone, she said, he's kidding, by the way. No, I'm not. I'm interested to see what you're going to do with those anchovies. Are they for the stew? Yes, my grandmother's recipe. Shane looked over at Evie in childlike wonder and delight. One of his favorite things was passed down recipes. He said they were always better than anything found on the internet. You may come if you like, but I must warn you, my apartment doesn't have much furniture. I moved in only a couple of weeks ago. We're not fancy people, said Shane. You don't need to impress us with places to sit. After getting the address in time, they left Simone to finish her shopping while they continued their afternoon adventure. Outside in the late September sunshine, the air had crisped, letting everyone know that summer was over and the cooler autumn weather was on its way. She is beyond hot. Hell yeah, you're going to pursue her. I can't believe you invited yourself over to dinner. It's the epitome of rude. You can thank me by being your most charming self tonight. Oh, I can't wait to see the beautiful babies you make. They crossed the street in order to cut through a small parkette on their way home. That's not how biology works. Even as she brushed the thought off, Evie felt the storm in her stomach. She worried the more time she spent with Simone, the more she felt like a hormonal teenager. Even when she was a hormonal teenager, she never felt so out of control. Simone made her feel like she was in a car on the highway with no brakes or steering. And that's it. Between Takes, available where books are sold online.
All right, thank you. That sounds really exciting. I have some questions for you. I have two questions actually. And Dena and Rad, get ready because I'm going to ask you both this question as well. So we're talking about characters in new situations, and your character, CJ, sounds like there was a move and there was some new people to interact with. But I'm curious, how much of this story was a new situation for you? Was there anything you had to research or learn in order to write this?
A little. So I actually do work in the television industry in Toronto, but I am so far removed as an editor. Like, I'm behind the scenes. So for me, I've never worked with an intimacy coordinator. So I had to do a lot of research for that. And I talked to friends who work in the industry. I have a friend who is she designs clothes for people. And so she was able to share some of the outfits that they put on people to make them when they are naked, but not naked. And she's like, the stuff that happens is insane. And not all of that made it into the book, but yeah, so there was a bit of research I had to do.
That's interesting. I feel like an intimacy coordinator is something relatively new for most people. I feel like I even didn't start hearing that that was a job that someone could have until not too long ago. So that's a very interesting position, no pun intended, to put your character in. My next question is, how much, like, for you, where does the new setting come into play most in your work? Is it like, I feel like this character moved, but is it new characters, new situations? Like, what do you tend to favor most?
When I think about the books I've done, I guess I've done quite a bit of like new situations for characters, because it's a great way to introduce people to the world. Like with sci-fi, I had a character who was starting on a ship, so she was brand new to everybody and she was meeting everyone for the first time. And then my last book was time travel, and so I had a character who had lived her entire life underground, and she got to see sunlight for the first time. So that was really fun to write. So I do, I
Very
guess I do
interesting.
like this. Yeah.
I feel like sci-fi and fantasy tend to lend themselves well to like new situations to sort of everybody, because you are introducing that new world as well. So that makes sense. I appreciate your read. It sounds hysterical, for one. I'm glad I was on mute, because at some point I was laughing, cackling even. So thank
It's
you.
good because it's like in a vacuum when you read here. So it's just
Right? There's
laughing.
not even like audience, but I'll let you know. I was definitely. I'm sure my partner is like, "What is wrong with him?" It sounds exciting. Okay, so we are going to hop over next to Radclyffe. Radclyffe has written over 60 romances in multiple genres. In 2021, it was the 20th anniversary of the publication of her first novel, Safe Harbor, and also a year that she passed 1 million copies sold, and that is an amazing landmark. She is also our tried and true leader, the publisher of Bold Strokes books. So thank you, Radclyffe, for joining us tonight. I have to say, to have joined Bold Strokes around that million copies sold mark was amazing to me. Like, I've never spoken to anybody who sold even 1,000 copies, at least not until I met everyone at Bold Strokes. So I was really grateful to be a part of that with you. So welcome tonight. Go ahead and give us a synopsis of what you'll be reading, and I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. I'm going to be reading from my December release, which is entitled Only This Summer. I didn't really realize it when I started writing this book, but this is one of my most favorite books, I think, because a great deal of it comes from my childhood experiences. And if I'll just tell you a little bit in the acknowledgement, I thanked my parents for this book, because when I was little, like really little, like 5, my parents started taking me into the Adirondacks to camp on my father's vacation. He was a shirt cutter and he worked in a factory. And he got 2 weeks off. And then 20 years later, he got 3 weeks off. And we would go and stay in a tent in the wilds. I mean, there were no organized campsites. We would just go to this pond where my dad fished when he was young and pitch a tent. And I thought everybody did that every summer. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life every summer. And this book is set in that place where we camped. And a lot of these things were memories for me. So this is the story of Lily Davenport, who is a New York City ER physician who has just emerged from 2.5 years of COVID. And as almost everyone knows, New York was one of the first sort of epicenters for the emergence of the virus. And they got really just devastated. And so it's her story and her seeking where her life is going to go next. And her good friend from college, whose name is Sarah, says, listen, why don't you take the summer off and come up to the camp? She is a camp counselor for the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York. Come up and be our medic. It's an easy gig. You'll like it. You can relax, you can regroup, and you can figure out what to do. The other character is Chase Fielder, who is Sarah's younger sister, who has always been a bit of a wild card in every sense of the word. And whereas Sarah has been the older sister, the more responsible sister, Chase was always the one who was out on the edge. And they are the two main characters. And this is the opening of the book from the very first sentence of the very first chapter. And my intention is to introduce you to Lily in an environment where she is completely a fish out of water. With a teeth-jarring thud, the left front wheel of Lily Davenport's BMW coupe dropped into a pothole the size of the Grand Canyon. Emitting an ominous groan that sounded unsettlingly human, the little two-seater convertible bounced out the other side of the chasm and promptly stalled. "Damn it," Lily muttered, shifting into park to restart the engine. She pushed the ignition button and, in the heart-stopping second of silence, feared her vehicle might refuse to go in protest over its recent maltreatment. Not that she could blame it. If she was a car, she'd refuse to go any further on this hellacious path too. It could hardly be called a road, considering it was barely wider than the BMW. When the engine turned over, she whispered a thank you and eased forward a few feet, trying to avoid the tree branches that jutted out over the rutted trail, and waited to see if anything vital fell off the undercarriage or exploded beneath the hood. Despite her open windows, the bit of breeze managing to make its way through the dense underbrush and towering pines offered no match for the early June sunshine, and the inside of the car already resembled an oven. Lily powered down the roof, that was still working, and stared at the hood, waiting for steam or smoke or something equally menacing to seep out. Why hadn't she listened when Sarah had suggested she might want to lease a Jeep or some other four-wheel drive vehicle for the summer? Better question, why hadn't Sarah told her that the way up to the lodge, described as a 3-season excess road, maybe in retrospect, she should have asked Sarah what that meant, was really little more than a goat path. Or maybe that should be deer path or some other creature's path. Road was obviously overly generous. When the engine continued ticking and nothing appeared to be burning or leaking or otherwise malfunctioning, Lily pushed her sunglasses up into her hair and squinted at the nav screen. She loved the little car for its easy maneuverability in the city and speed on the rare occasion she had a chance to get out of the city. But the dash was a bit cramped, and reading the map function on the small screen was a challenge at the best of times. At the moment, the monitor showed only a generic regional geographic overview. Thank you, Google, but not helpful when surrounded by forest, apparently uninhabited forest. She must be on the wrong road, non-road. Mentally reviewing her drive, Lily determined that at least 5 miles and what felt like 5 hours before, she'd been on the right route. She was sure of it. She must have turned off the twisting road circling the shore of Lake George too soon. Turning around was presently out of the question, literally. She wasn't about to risk a 10-point turn and end up putting the rear of her Z4 into a ditch and walking all the way back to civilization. All she needed to do was slow down and try to avoid any more unexpected road hazards until she found a place to turn around. Or if she was incredibly lucky, which would be an anomaly, she might actually find the lodge. She hadn't passed a building or another vehicle or any sign of life, human or otherwise, since she'd left the highway and headed off into the Adirondacks. When all her gauges remained blessedly in the mid-zone, suggesting she hadn't done irreparable damage to her automobile, she set off once again. Sweat trickled at her temples and misted the back of her neck. She settled her sunglasses into place and squinted into the early morning glare. She'd made excellent time driving north from the city, but that had been open throughway driving. And at 5 a.m, she'd been able to avoid speed traps with the aid of her radar. What should have been the shortest part of her journey was turning out to be the most arduous, hopefully not a portent for what was to come. Giving up on the GPS, she trusted to fate and continued deeper into the densely packed evergreens. She swung around a blind corner, hoping the camp would come into sight any moment, or she would at least see a sign saying, "Turn around here, you idiot," and slammed on her brakes. Oh, Heart pounding, arms braced against the wheel, she stared at the front end of the vehicle she'd nearly hit and blinked. It was not a mirage. An army green Jeep with the roof removed and a single occupant in olive green fatigues sat a foot off her front bumper. Wonderful. She was alone in the mountains, faced with a survivalist, or worse, some private militia playing soldier. She didn't even have cell service. She ordered herself to take a breath. Panic was not her usual response to a crisis. At least it hadn't been, not before. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That sounds exciting. I relate. I have a very tiny car myself. So there's just some situations where I'm like, oh no, I don't know if this car will survive that. So, and it sounds like a lot to go through in one car ride. So I'm very excited for that character and what's next for her. So the first question is, well, I know you have a background in medicine. That much I do know about you. Is there anything writing this book that was a new situation even to you?
For me, well, actually, I set this in a traditional formal summer camp because I wanted it to be pretty realistic for the present time. And there actually are 3 of these camps in New York that are run by the DEC. And I did a lot of research because I've never been to one of those camps. I've never, for me, it was go with mom and dad and you're in a tent, and every year the same 10 families came back. But I never was alone in a camp like this with other kids my own age, for example. So I had to really research what kind of programs were offered and what did they do and where did they eat and things like that. So the setting, other than the geography, the mountains, was a new thing for me, which is often the case. I was just thinking when I wrote Firestorm, which is one of my first responders, it's about a smoke jumper, which obviously I don't know anything about smoke jumping at all. So I had to do a lot of reading. So I don't often write about things that I know absolutely nothing about. I think that it's very difficult to do that. But there are some things you can write about that there's plenty of things available for you to read and get a realistic sense. So in this book, it was actually the camp itself was the most challenging thing for me to write.
That's exciting. Interesting. I also have never been to a camp like that. For me, I related. It was a lot of like family. We were camper people, so we just take an RV up and hang out with a bunch of other people in their RV. So I would also have to look up camp and say, what do children do all together at camp? My second question for you is, well, it had one, and I lost it. Let me look it up real quick.
Oh, well, I'll add something to the first question, which is my other character who does not appear in, well, the other character obviously just made an appearance at the end of that scene. Chase Fielder is the Department of Environmental Conservation law enforcement agent. So it's basically a cop and a doctor story in the mountains, which I write a lot of. And I had a great time researching that because in New York, you can every day get a bulletin from the DEC, which tells you everything that the officers have been doing, like all the rescues they've been doing in the mountains and the people they've been pulling. They are the ATVs they're pulling out of the lake that go through the ice. So I was getting all of my, plot points from the DEC bulletins every day. And I've been reading them for like 4 months because I knew I was going to write this book. So that was my research for that character.
That's fantastic. If only all research were that easy. How fun. I bet some of those were wild.
They were.
So my question was, is there any situation or setup for a new experience that is an absolute must for you after 60 plus novels? Is there something that's you never get tired of seeing, or the reverse? Is there something you've seen where you're like, absolutely never this again?
Well, the second part's easy. The answer is no. I mean, I think that there's nothing, if it suited my sense of the story, then I don't care if I've written it before in a similar way. I mean, I think that we all tell the same story almost every time, because as authors, we have a message that resonates for us, but it shouldn't be the same story in the sense that the characters should be different and their challenges should be different, but very often the themes are the same. And I think that's true for me. I like to start a book with at least one character who has been forced into an entirely new situation. And the one I always bring up is Above All Honor, where, a Secret Service agent is suddenly, shifted from one division to another to protect the president's daughter. It's something that has to challenge the character. And I usually open with that scene, because I think it very quickly establishes character. I mean, I hope that you have a sense of who Lily is. I don't. It's such a different reading from CJ's, which there was tons of dialogue, which gave you a really good sense of the characters. For me, it's very internal. That was all basically inside her head as she's driving that car. And hopefully it's just as effective. I mean, they're two very different ways of showing character. So
I was thinking as we were reading, I was like, the internal dialogue that this person has is fantastic and very relatable. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I agree. I have a sense of who she is just as much as CJ's character, and it was great to read that, or to listen. I didn't read, to hear you read. Okay, we're gonna move to Deanna now. So Deanna.
Dena, thank you.
Sorry, my bad, Dena. I am so sorry. I've been practicing your name and I still messed it up.
Yeah.
Dena. Dena Blake is an eternal optimist and a would-be chef who enjoys growing her own tomatoes when Mother Nature allows. She writes contemporary romance. Her books are steamy, sometimes funny, and always full of angst. Dena. Okay, I'll turn it over to you. Let us know what you're reading, and you have the floor.
Thanks, Sandra. I'm reading from A Spark in the Air, my December release. It's a contemporary romance set in a cozy Vermont town during the holiday season. The book is about a wireless company executive going to a small town to sell them broadband internet. In this scene, which is, I'm going to say a third of the way in, Crystal finds herself asleep on Janie's shoulder after the ride home from Janie's brother's Christmas tree farm, where they've helped load trees. Crystal opened her eyes slightly as the truck's load and the lights from the tree stand came into view. Comfort rushed through her. She'd forgotten so many of the joys of the holiday season since she'd become a workaholic. The day had been magical. The snow, the trees, the kiss, all of it. Her right hand was cold, but her left was warm. She glanced around the cab of the truck to get her bearings. Her hand was wrapped in Janie's, being held captive on Janie's thigh. Did Janie do that, or did I? She released her grip and laced their fingers together as she raised her head. Janie didn't resist. Maybe it was both of them. Crystal covered her mouth as she yawned. Sorry, all that fresh air got to me. The last thing she remembered was leaving the farm. Not to mention the work, Janie grinned as she stared into her eyes. Nate's quite the taskmaster. As they pulled up to the tree lot, they could see the fire pit blazing. The temperature had dropped a bit while they were at the farm, but she hadn't really noticed the cold at all while she was pressed up against Janie on the ride home. The tree farm, the town, and Janie had been more than she'd expected when she arrived in Pine Grove. Crystal had two problems to resolve now: how to get the town to accept broadband, and how to ensure Janie didn't hate her when she found out who she was and why she was here. Why don't you girls go grab a bite to eat? Janie's dad startled Crystal out of her thoughts. We can unload the trees, right, Nate? Nate nodded. Bring us back some burgers. They have killer meatloaf at the diner. Janie glanced at Crystal. You like meatloaf? Love it. She didn't eat it much at home. Cooking for one meant she'd have leftover for days, and that wasn't practical with her schedule. They headed across the street to the diner, where they took a booth near the window that had a clear view of the tree lot, with old-fashioned lampposts and wrought iron benches lining the streets. It really was the perfect Norman Rockwell town. The waitress appeared immediately to take their order. Hey, Delta, we'll both have the meatloaf. Seemed Janie knew everyone. Mashed potatoes and green beans? They both nodded. Anything to drink? Water, they said simultaneously. Jinx, they both added, and then laughed. They sat across from each other in silence. Crystal needed to start talking before it got awkward. So does your dad or your brother own the farm? Both. My dad retired a few years ago, and now my brother runs it. The booth seat crackled as she shifted. I got Cyber Shack, and he got the farm. Is that what you wanted? Yes and no. I mean, I love the cafe and the farm, but I guess I never thought I'd be in this town for the rest of my life. Janie held up her hand. Not that I don't love it. I just never leave for anything. Not even for a few days. I really thought you were kidding when you said that yesterday. No, never been out of the state. Can't your dad or mom handle the cafe for a week or two? They probably could, but I don't really have any place to go. I'd hate to ask them without having anything planned. You could come see me. That'd be a long way to drive. Crystal almost laughed out loud, but she could see that Janie was serious. They have this new invention called planes, you know. I've never been to California. I guess it would be nice to visit. See you again. Janie slowly snaked her hand across the table and tapped Crystal's fingers with her own in an awkwardly shy dance. Janie's confidence seemed to disappear when it came to romance. You're welcome to come see me anytime. In an attempt to calm Janie's anxiety, Crystal flipped her hand and took hold of Janie's. I'll show you all the sights. She really needed to stop this masquerade, but couldn't bring herself to spoil the moment. I had a wonderful time today. Me too, Janie glanced up from their hands, which seemed to be glued together at this point. Delta appeared with their plates. You ladies need anything else? Janie glanced up. No, I think we're good. Crystal was far from good. Everything that had happened over the past few days had her all mixed up. Maybe if she got back to business, that would change. She released Janie's hand and picked up her fork. This looks good. Best in town. Janie reached for her fork, broke a chunk loose with the side of it, speared it, and put it into her mouth. Crystal pulled her cell phone from her pocket and looked at it. A conversation starter. That's not going to work here, Janie said matter-of-factly. I forgot. Crystal set it on the table as a reminder of why she was here. So tell me again why you don't have broadband in Pine Grove? Janie stopped chewing for a moment and set her fork on her plate before she wiped her mouth with a napkin. Because of that right there. Here we are having a nice conversation over some really good food, and you checked your phone to take you out of it, to somewhere else. I see your point. Looking at her phone was far from what she wanted to do right now. She wanted to push her plate across the table and slide into the other side of the booth to be closer to Janie. You're right about the food and the conversation. She took the phone from the table and dropped it into her pocket. There's no place I'd rather be. Her mission would have to wait. Thank you.
Thank you. That sounded so lovely. I have a particular fondness for tree farms. There was one, I knew some people who own one growing up, so I feel like I've had like 3 very distinct emotions in this reading session, and I don't really know what to do with myself at the moment, so I really appreciate your reading, and it sounds like they're an interesting pair. So the first question is, is there something new about this situation to you? So we're talking today about new situations for characters, but was there anything new to you in the writing experience?
So I've been to lots of small towns. I'm not going to say I've ever been to one during the holidays, and that's always been an enchanting thought. Probably on my bucket list of things to do. So that's new to me. That whole Christmas atmosphere. It's a magical time of year for most people, not everyone, but it really did put me in the Christmas spirit writing it. So I would say that's the new part of it for me.
Oh, very interesting. I don't usually read, or I have yet to write anything related to the holidays, but I do feel like the small town at Christmas is definitely a vibe. So I get that. In putting your characters in new situations or setting up something new for the experience of the reader, do you worry, like what do you do to maintain your sense of character? So what do you do to keep your characters remembering who they are?
Wow, that's a good one. Well, first off, everybody has to really get into the character and get into their mind. And like for Janie, she lives in a small town. She runs a cyber cafe, which is really the hub of the town. That's where they go to get their internet, play their games, do all of that. So you have to look at how broadband and Wi-Fi is going to impact her business, or if that was going to be what she wanted in the first place. She really didn't have a choice in the matter. It's kind of a family business. So, and I kind of got that from, I'm going to say I had family business, ran a video store for 20 years here, family business, before, everything went to internet. But I kind of pulled from some of that. Sometimes you just don't have choices and you do what you have to do. So that's how I pulled for that particular character. Now, Crystal, on the other hand, she just wants to do her job and wants to put internet in the town. And she really at first didn't really care who she impacts until she gets to know everybody and knows the town, and then realizes, oh, this is why they really want to keep it out. But then they try to, got to find a balance maybe. So, but yeah, you have to really get into their head and find their motivation.
Yeah, fair. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to bring everybody back together and ask some questions. So again, if you have questions for our authors, please drop them into the Q&A and I will get those asked. And if you haven't seen them yet, the links are available to purchase the 3 books read about here on Bold Stroke's website. So you can find those in the general chat. Okay, so I'm actually going to ask everyone that question now. I feel like it's hard enough to have new situations, but what do you do, CJ and Radclyffe, to maintain the sense of character, or is it about changing that sense of character in these new situations?
Can I ask a clarification? Are you asking how do we maintain consistency in our characters?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I would like to start at that point, I guess. I mean, I think that the reason we put them in new situations is to challenge them, to make them be off balance. I think one of the best ways to show character growth is to show that they're actually off balance and not sure why they're feeling or reacting the way they do. I think that's particularly true in a romance. I like to show that the other character puts them off balance by making them feel something different or behave differently than they are used to perceiving themselves to do. So that's the kind of what I think newness does. But I think character consistency is exactly what Dena said. You have to know your characters in terms of what makes them tick and what is their motivation, what are their fears, what are their desires, what are the secret things they wish they had and are afraid to wish for. Those are the kinds of things that will allow you, as you write this character, to keep them believable and consistent because they're coming from that core motivation in every situation. Was that the question you were asking?
Yes.
Or did I make up an answer?
No, that was great. Thank you. I feel like that it makes sense to distinguish between character growth versus character consistency. And I feel like that's not a distinction that gets discussed much, but I feel like we experience it as we write in our own ways. So I appreciate that. What about you, CJ?
So for me, it's interesting because I find I get to know the characters the more I write. Like I start with my outline and I make up their conflicts and what drives them and everything. And then as I put them in situations, sometimes I find the story leads them to do certain things just because I get to know them better. And I think it's funny because I had an instructor in film school for screenwriting. And he's like, don't ever be afraid to let your characters drive the story. So the more you get to know your characters, a lot of times they will really present what's supposed to happen. And I think I can always tell it's working when I'm writing and a character, I'm like, oh, the character, this is gonna happen. And then it just sort of points the way to like a problem that I was having for a plot point that needed to happen. So Dena's right. Like, you really do need to know your characters, and the more you know your characters, the better they will guide themselves through these situations and be consistent in how they approach everything. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. So awesome. Thank you. I was curious. So there's always a conversation about if you're a plotter versus a pantser, and I was just wondering how many of the new situation, or how much of the new situation, do you plan for, and then is there anything that catches you by surprise as you go along? Whoever feels ready.
I
That's an everyone question.
I'm very much I know I outline everything before, but I'm also open to stuff changing. And I'm trying to think in between takes, because now it's so hard, because like I wrote it, like it came out in December, but I actually wrote it like the December before. So I knew I knew the basic plot, but there were some the conflicts, like minutia, that did change. And I'm trying to think, one of them was it was a side story that sort of came about because of who Simone is and how she is very curious by nature, and she sort of stumbles on something and discovers a character who she thinks isn't on the up and up. And so that really drove a lot of the last half of the story. And I knew the basic plot point, but she really drove that part to happen the way it did. Again, I don't know if I answered your question. I started and then went on.
I like it. I like the answer.
I'll take it. I'm a pantser, and I start with two characters, a conflict, and a setting. And I don't know too much more about the story. Like CJ, I think you can be consistent, but also learn more about your characters as you write. I always do. They always get deeper, as you know, I consider the first 25% of my book where I'm really developing the characters and the conflict. And that's when I'm really starting to learn who they are. And then, the middle 50% is the tough part, where stuff has to happen. And I never know what that stuff's going to be when I start writing the book. And I'm like, oh, crap, what am I going to do with them? Getting them on the stage and getting them set up and getting the secondary characters. And that's easy. But then all the stuff that drives the story has to happen. And I think setting and the external events, I will think about 2 or 3 things that I want to get in there, and then hopefully other things will come along too. But yeah, I think that I don't have any of that in my head when I start writing at all.
And it's amazing that like what you can do with just that. Like, you've done amazing work, and so it's a system that works. So I like it.
Lucky.
There. What about you, Dena?
So I used to be a total pantser, and I've tried plotting my last few books, and I kind of plot out the storyline, but I still don't write in order, and my characters drive me, and I think there's always something new that comes into play, and I'll look where I can use it in the story, or I just change, what I plotted, because I can't necessarily stick to what I plotted. But due to time constraints and other things, I've tried to do plotting so that, hey, I know where I'm going, instead of just letting whatever pop into my head, because that's what I've done before, because the characters really do drive me. But sometimes it helps to know where they're going. So
Madness, like out of order. I don't know how you do it. Yeah. I know other people do it. I could not do it.
Yeah. I do it all the time, because I see characters in a particular scene at a particular time in their journey, and that just happens. So that's how I write out of order. I don't use that, so I write it down and I throw it in there.
I think that's really interesting because that happens to me too. I mean, I will know that there's a scene I want to write, but I won't write it until I get them to that point. And that's what keeps me writing. But we all have different mechanisms for how we are able to get what we imagine out onto paper. I worry if you write out of order that you'll miss the development, the little bits of development in the character that get you to those points. But sometimes you have to go back and fill in. If you've written that scene and then, you get there and then you realize you need a little bit more before that to make that scene work. It's just a kind of back and forth.
Yeah, that makes sense though. It does, because you're bringing them through their journey and that develops all of that.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
I'm a hamster personally. I've never met an outline I liked. But I feel like often when I write out of order, because I'll do that as well, that usually ends up being like the opening scene for some reason. I'm like, and that's just where I start. And I'm like, I guess we're going on the journey from here. So I think it's interesting to have those moments come in the middle or towards the end. So all of the books we've heard are romance. Are there situations or fish out of water experiences that you feel are unique to romance novels or to the setup of a romance novel?
I don't think so. I mean, romance is so versatile that you could do almost anything, anytime, any place, any world that you want to, you can write sci-fi romance. So I don't think there's anything that's particular. Well, there are tropes, obviously, office romance, that sort of thing, which are very popular. So I think the tropes perhaps would be, very unique to romance. But still they're adaptable. I mean, if you look at all of the Star Treks, you've got lots of office romance in space. So
Very true. Any thoughts, Dena or CJ?
I agree. I think tropes are where you're going to find that the fish out of water really works in romance. And it's funny you say the office romance, because that kind of clicked into my head as like someone coming in who has to fix up a business or something, and you get that conflict, and it's that works itself so well into romance because you have the people who are butting heads and they don't like each other at first, and then suddenly romance. So yeah, I don't really have much more to add except agree.
Okay.
I'm going to agree with that. And, I love that, enemies to lovers. That's one of my favorite things to read. So I like to write friends to lovers, but enemies to lovers. So I would agree with everything Rod and CJ said.
Awesome. I think we are getting close to the end of our session, if I'm keeping track of time properly. And so I think what I would like to see is if each author could go back through one more time, give us your title again, and if you have the book, let's see it just before we wrap up. So let's start with Dena.
It's Spark in the Air, Christmas romance, All's Fair in Love and Wi-Fi. Available since in December.
Thank you. And CJ?
Between Takes, yeah, it's available now. It came out December.
Thank you. And Radclyffe?
Mine is Only This Summer. It came out in December. And oh no, this isn't it. This is a book by Lee Lynch that was written in 1970.
I love it.
Thank you. Okay. So with that, again, please check the links in the chat. They will lead you to boldstrokesbooks.com to purchase these lovely titles. And we hope to see you in future sessions. Thank you, everyone, authors, for joining me as your moderator. And then thank you, participants, for joining us. And I hope you have a great night.
Nice job, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.